show you all how to make what has become our favorite cake. It is a chocolate cake with toffee apple frosting. It's easy and it comes together really quickly. So let's get started with the cake. I have some flour in a bowl and I'm going to add to it some white sugar, and then I'm going to add some salt and some baking powder and some baking soda. The original recipe calls for only soda, but I am adding baking powder just for a little reassurance. Check the video description for a recipe if you want a written version of it, by the way. That was a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. That's pretty much what's going to impart most of the flavor, and that was a teaspoon of espresso powder. That's optional, but it really helps amp up the chocolate flavor, so I recommend that. Now use any utensil that you want, that you happen to have, to stir these ingredients together. A whisk makes it easier and faster, but you can use a fork or a spoon or anything you have. Just stir it until it's mostly homogeneous. All right, now we're going to do the wet ingredients. I like to use a Pyrex glass measuring cup because it makes everything easier and then you only have to clean up one dish that way. So I've got a cup of water in there, and to it I am adding 1/3 cup of vegetable oil. I'm just squirting it in until it reads 1 1/3 cups. Then I'm adding 2 teaspoons of cider vinegar. You can use any vinegar you want, actually. I've used raspberry vinegar with this cake and it's a nice note. And vanilla extract. And that's it for the wet ingredients. There's no eggs, there's no dairy. This cake is vegan and also very cheap. It uses all pantry staples. So that's why I love it. I made it all the time when I was a kid as well. It's super easy to make. Mix all the ingredients together, again, with any utensil you happen to have. A whisk is the best and the easiest and the fastest, but use a fork, use a spoon, use whatever you have, and just mix it until it comes together. You do not want to overmix it. That is one way that you can mess up this cake, over mixing it. The second way you can potentially mess up this cake is over baking it or under baking it. But other than that, it's pretty foolproof. Bat off any extra batter and lick a little bit to make sure that it tastes good. It does. And then get out a 8x8 pan, and I've greased it a little bit. And you don't need to put parchment in here because this recipe, you actually leave the cake in the pan after you've baked it. That's atypical. So I just tap it on the countertop to make sure any air bubbles are out and put it in a 350-degree oven to bake for a half an hour to 40 minutes. I check it after 30, and you want a toothpick to come out clean. Then you know it's done. And set it on a wire rack to cool. While it's cooling, make the frosting. So I've got 3½ tablespoons of vegan butter and 1/3 cup of brown sugar and a little pinch of salt. And this is vegan because I was making this during Veganuary, where I was vegan for the month of January, but totally use normal butter if you want. And you melt these in a saucepan on medium heat just until they come together. That's a lot of the theme of this cake, is stir things until it comes together. The fat will separate at first, but keep stirring it and it will eventually melt into a more homogeneous consistency. We're sort of making a quick and dirty butterscotch sauce here, but you don't want to cook it too long and turn it into actual candy. So I'm adding a tablespoon of soy milk here, add any milk you want, and this is boiled apple cider. This is the special secret ingredient of this recipe. If you don't have it, you could replace it with more milk and just make this a butterscotch, like toffee sauce, and that's delicious as well. But I make this by boiling down 8 cups of apple cider to 1 cup. And it's like molasses. So 1 tablespoon of that. That was a very generous tablespoon. And then, just like before, you want to stir this until it comes together. And it should bubble a little bit, but not too much. You only want it to bubble for like 15 seconds maybe, like while it's coming together. You do not want to cook this any further, otherwise it will turn into candy. The end product is kind of fudgy in consistency, but yeah, you don't want it to be literal candy. So once it's come together, take it off of the heat and let it cool for 10 minutes. And I just leave it in the pot because that's fewer dishes to clean. So after your frosting has cooled down, this is when you add the vanilla extract so that it won't lose its beautiful vanilla flavor. And then you dump in a cup of powdered sugar. And just once again, just like the rest of the recipe, you stir it until it comes together. And it's going to look at first like it's not coming together. Like, look at this. It looks like there's way too much powdered sugar, but powdered sugar has a habit of just disappearing before your very eyes. It's magical that way. So trust the process and keep stirring. And like, if you get to the end and like the sugar is dissolved into the frosting, but it's still like incredibly thick, you can add like a little tiny bit of milk back in. I'd say like 1/2 teaspoon at a time. just to get it to the right consistency. But this is what you're looking for. It's kind of like peanut butter in both color and in consistency. And then to frost the cake, you can frost the cake when it's still slightly warm, by the way, unlike most cakes. But I like to dollop all of the frosting into the center and then very slowly and gently, with gentle pressure, spread it out with this palette knife thing from the center of the cake. If you do that, you will not get crumbs in your frosting. But if you do get crumbs in your frosting, who cares? It still tastes good. It just won't look as pretty. And yeah, this offset spatula that I'm using is really handy for this sort of task, but if you don't have it, just use a butter knife, whatever. Or you could get well, I wouldn't recommend getting a piping bag out. This frosting is very sticky and it hardens quickly. So this next step is optional, but I like adding some chopped pecans at the end. It adds a nice crunch and a nice flavor. But as you can see, they're kind of rolling off because the frosting, like I said, it dries very quickly and it's kind of fudgy in consistency. So I have to pat them into the frosting to make them stick. Not that hard, not that big a deal, but just be aware of that if you decide to add chopped nuts. And there it is. It is delicious, it's easy, it's relatively cheap, and I hope you add it to your regular dessert rotation because it is an amazing cake.